What's up, guys? Happy Monday and welcome into another great episode of Gramlich and Mac Lane, presented by our friends over at Ingles. We're continuing to roll down the path of these ACC under reviews, and it's time for the Clemson Tigers. I've been excited about this episode. We've been waiting, to get this to you guys, and we've got the great Larry Williams joining us today. Larry provided some really fun insight. You guys are going to love this. We were all over the place. And, it was really fun. Expect you guys to be in these comments, kind of chatting up what you think and kind of where Larry, provides some fun insight for us about various topics from the season to the Alabama situation and everything in between of where Clemson football is right now. So love this insight. We're going to get a quick message from our friends over at Ingles. And here's the interview with Larry.
Did you know Ingles only sells USDA choice and prime cuts of meat? Maybe it's time to reward yourself. Our butchers cut all our meat fresh in the store every day. Grass-fed, organic, you name it. Not only that, we'll even cut it to order just the way you like it. And we grind meat fresh in the store multiple times a day. It's all in the bag. That's the best meat in town for the best folks in town. Ingles, low prices, love the savings.
Larry Williams, brother, welcome into the podcast. We're super excited to break it down with you today. Talk all things Clemson Tigers. Thank you, man. It's a little cold in the upstate. You've got your hat on. It's like 10 degrees outside. How are we feeling? We doing all right?
I have paid my electricity bill.
That's good.
I'm just doing it to get in the spirit of the frigid days here. So it's cold down here in the basement sometimes. So
I get that.
Oh, yeah.
I understand.
It's freezing
when you're out in the
outside
garage,
right now.
you're in the basement, whatever it is, wherever you try to get away, sometimes the heating and air doesn't work the best in those places.
Right.
That's so true. Okay, Larry, I want to start with this. First of all, as we told you off air, we're both big fans. I subscribe to Tiger Illustrated. My husband, though, is obsessed with you. So he's going to be very excited. He actually doesn't even really listen to our podcast, but he'll probably listen to this one. So this is getting me some points.
Well,
major points.
Through the years, when I'm at a tailgate or at a social event or a restaurant or something, and a subscriber introduces me to his spouse, and it's usually his spouse, the look that I get from the wives normally is like, it's not one of being impressed.
Right.
It is one of me being more like a bartender or a drug dealer.
No.
You're the reason my husband can't ever focus on washing the dishes or what I'm saying, is always on his phone.
It's a real one.
So, but we appreciate the addicts, just probably more than anybody.
Whatever it takes, baby. Whatever it takes.
He's an addict. He's an addict, especially some of those Dabo's Tiger calls this year. I watched Tyler and Spartanburg unfold firsthand from my husband on the boards, so that was really fun.
Y'all, how powerful was Tyler? Like, I'm not. I was never in the camp of, and still am not in the camp of, before that call, Dabo was just Mr. Comfortable with himself and going through the motions, and it took that for him to get mad and get focused. But, like, it had some power, I think. Like, maybe in terms of the news last week of Dabo in Alabama and, the perception of Dabo, I think some of that is a negative, right? Like, because people elsewhere are like, man, I don't know, this guy's kind of thin-skinned, whatever. I'm just saying we would view Dabo the same way from afar, I think, as a lot of people from outside are viewing him. We know him. You guys know him better than anybody. I feel like I know him pretty well. And so we understand some of his calculations and some of his methods. But, I don't know if Alabama's AD, was totally enamored of, like if you're thinking about replacing Nick Saban and the Tyler from Spartanburg thing happens and it goes viral for 48 hours, I guess it was, maybe even more. Your first thought is he might not be able to handle things all that well here, where it's Tyler from Spartanburg times 100, So that's a fascinating part of it. Just to, I'm going, this is a roundabout way of me saying, man, Tyler from Spartanburg might have had some influence in how Dabo was viewed by Alabama, whether it was fans or even maybe their AD, as he maybe zeroed in on some other candidates, perhaps.
Yeah, and before KG gets to more of the Alabama story here, because I'm sure there's a question that be asked there. I do have some breaking news that you guys probably don't even know this, but I'm Tyler from Spartanburg, and I did that. So you're welcome, Clemson family. You're welcome.
Can we stay on this for a second?
Mac. You got me. That was so well done. Oh my God. Well done. Well done.
Get the trophy. Get the trophy.
Go ahead, Larry.
The most hilarious part of that, looking back, is the people who thought he didn't exist.
Right. Or that it was a plant. It was a bug. It was like it was all planned. It was a plant that somebody was calling on purpose.
And I want to tell y'all, actually, I think, Mac, was I on with you and Roddy a week later or so, and I was y'all sort of how some of that went down. So it happened on a Monday night, and at some point after the show, when all hell was breaking loose, I realized that, oh my gosh, he's a subscriber.
Yes.
And so then my boss was like, are you thinking about having him on for a podcast or something tomorrow? I'm like, heck no. Because I had no interest in, this dude had already laid down, he had already drawn his line in the sand. He had already made his attack. And so I wasn't going to be viewed as the guy who was like further amplifying that. So I had no interest in having more conversation with the guy. Not that I had anything against him. So the next morning, I'm at Dabo's press conference, waiting for it to start. I'm there like 10 minutes early, and I check my direct messages, and it's Tyler from Spartanburg. And he says, hey, man, and I'm disclosing this because I don't think he would have a problem with it. In fact, I know he wouldn't. But he said, I realized that I didn't handle that in the best of ways. Do you have any advice for me on how I should handle this? I said, man, first of all, I just full disclosure, I think you went too far. Dabo also went too far, but it's nothing personal towards you at all. No problem. I appreciate you being a subscriber. And then he messages me back, and he says, do you think I should make a post on the message board, apologizing to Dabo? And so at that point, I'm like, okay, this guy, he's definitely, showing that he's human, and then he feels like he went too far, made a mistake, even though he did feel like there was some substance to some of his arguments. He just went a little Old Testament, I guess, literally, in bringing up scripture and all that. And so at that point, I'm like, hey man, would you want to do an interview? Because to me, like, that was another layer of the story was, hey, this dude is not just some totally anti-Dabo or anti-Clemson guy. And so later in the day, I interviewed him for about an hour. Former Marine for 5 years. He was actually overseas during some of the biggest moments. He was at Quantico on a training mission during the 16 title. And as y'all remember, it was cold that night in Tampa.
Yeah.
Frigid in Virginia. And he said, this is so vivid. He was in his tent, and he had his cell phone, and his cell phone kept turning off because it was so cold. And so he put his cell phone under his arm for however many minutes to warm it up, pull it out, turn it on. Oh my God. But he ended up being able to watch the final play live, And so this is like a generational fan. Anyway, I say all that to say, people take their own theories and run with them. And so our friend Corey Miller, who's on the Fox, he does a weekly during the season appearance with Patrick Sapp on Fox Carolina. And at one point, Patrick Sapp called me a few weeks later. He goes, man, your boy Corey Miller was all over you the other day. And I'm like, what do you mean? He said that Corey Miller was saying that it was a plant, and that Tyler didn't exist, or that I'm Dabo's boy, and so Dabo put me up to interviewing him or whatever. And it's just like the stuff you hear from people is just crazy. And that even applies to, I guess, what we're talking about now with Dabo in Alabama.
Mm.
You know, it's people take whatever facts there are and they contort them to further entrench themselves into whatever they believe. And of course, that applies to everything, politics, whatever. But it's like the people who don't want to believe that Dabo even spent a second thinking about going to Alabama are like, yep, told you. There's no way he would ever go there. He's here for good. The people who think that Dabo didn't have a chance in hell at getting that job, well, told you, Anyway, it's just, it's crazy how, I guess, entrenched people get into whatever they have. I don't know where I was going, but my point was the Tyler from Spartanburg stuff. The funniest part is just how it can take on a life of its own to the point where people say it was a plant or Larry was doing Dabo's bidding for him and took part in the conspiracy or whatever, when actually it was the story to me was one of humanity. It was one of somebody getting too emotional, which fans are prone to do, but then realizing, man, I got too crazy, and then being very public about his regret over approaching that way.
Well, Tyler Spartanburg is real. We know that. And he did, in a funny way, have an impact on this season. Let's talk about 2023 here, Larry. And really a season that had 2 seasons, I would say, if you're Clemson, probably up to the NC State game and then Notre Dame and on. So how was Clemson able, in your mind, to start so poorly, which was kind of surprising to all of us, but then rally and finish really well? How did this season unfold?
I think a big part of it was that week of the Notre Dame game after they got back from Raleigh. Dabo, and I think y'all picked up on this too probably, but he was the most scorched earth he's been ever that week. And I'm talking like everybody in the building, I think I want to say it was Xavier Thomas after the Notre Dame game was reflecting on that week. And he said, yeah, he even challenged the guy who cuts the grass. That actually happened. I think the guy who cuts the grass might have thought his job was in danger for some reason, the way he was cutting it or something. I don't know. Not naming any names, but that actually happened. Going into that game, two sort of snapshots that come into my mind are going into the week of the Notre Dame game and the week of the South Carolina game. The week of the Notre Dame game, the injuries on the offensive line, nobody in his right mind thought that they could overcome that. I mean, they were dropping like flies. Colin Sadler was pretty much out. You'd already lost Marcus Tate. You'd already lost Walker Parks, of course. You're going to have to roll with Trent Howard and Harris Sewell. Apologies. Like, even people within the team were like, we're going to lose by 30, I'm not saying there wasn't some confidence on the inside, and then I think the South Carolina game, and they were a mass unit just from sickness.
Yeah.
And they were having to take a quarantine bus to Columbia.
Wow.
Who was it who didn't even Shipley didn't practice all week?
Yeah. Well, and Shipley was out for Notre Dame too, so that added to that for that week.
People on IVs the day of the game, like, you've heard of flu games like Michael Jordan and all that, and but I think, it was just on such a large scale. And when Dabo mentions that, it's the first thing that he mentions in his post-game press conference, just how laid out they were. I just think of those two snapshots as when and how a season turned from being disastrous, and then turned the opposite. Well, not the opposite, because it wasn't the season that they wanted it to be, but they sort of saved the season, right? Like, had you beat Notre Dame, that's all well and good. You have that 3-game winning streak. But if you lose to South Carolina, it's going to be hard to find much satisfaction in that. And so that's what I think of. I think back, of course, to the preseason when you have a bunch of talk of the national championship, and it seemed like just a program that was maybe a little too impressed with itself. And I'm interested to see how that changes moving forward into this offseason, into this August camp um, coming up. In that, maybe the lesson here is to um, more demanding. Not that it's a country club or anything otherwise or previously, but um, I think the last 3 years, a lot of lessons have been learned. Chief among them is not every five-star quarterback is going to be Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence. And maybe one of the other ones is the lesson of human nature of it is hard as heck to fight complacency and comfort and sort of self-admiration, I guess, in the wake of high achievement. And so I know I'm talking a lot of big picture stuff and not necessarily the last half of the season, but that's what's really on my mind when you ask me about this season and how they turned it around.
Yeah, it is fascinating. And I think the first part of the season, specifically looking at just the turnovers, man. I mean, it was baffling. And you ask yourself why? You ask yourself how? Like, is it coaching? Is it attention to detail? Is it players not buying in? And the truth is probably somewhere in the middle of all that. There's something, because it just doesn't happen overnight. And that's what seemingly we saw, especially looking in that Duke game. I think back to some crazy, just, silly decisions being made and throwing a pass when you clearly run it and, vice versa and trying to run yourself and not just playing within the offense. It was just a really strange kind of, I don't know, total package of this stuff happening. And then, as you said, the Notre Dame game, and it all just seemed to play a little bit smoother. Everything just kind of came together. From a leadership standpoint, who stood out the most to you on the team, from a player standpoint, looking at that maybe helped turn that around to get these guys going and focused to saying, hey, let's go win 5 in a row. Let's go have a playoff run here, something that we hopefully will do next year in this 12-team playoff.
I think you would have to start on the defensive side, given that that's where they were arguably elite, top 10 good statistically. I think a lot about that the freshman on defense. Dabo told us coming in that these dudes were just different. And I think you could really feel that, not just in the second half of the season, but throughout the season when, with TJ Parker and Khalil Barnes, Avion Terrell, of course there are more, Peter Woods, but just when we talk about that sense of the notion of comfort and maybe some entitlement sort of creeping into the program and maybe complacency, you don't feel that with those dudes, right? Like, and I think what they bring has sort of permeated the defense to the point where you have an RJ Mickens who is probably on the verge of leaving, but is in like, you know what? I'm coming back in large part because I want to be a part of this ethic, I guess, for lack of a better word, that you feel on that side of the ball. I think Barrett Carter, very similar. So if we're talking about leadership, I think it starts on that side of the ball. But the turnaround, again, you go back to the offensive line going into the Notre Dame game, it was not rational to say, okay, they're going to come out with Trent Howard and the freshman at right guard and just blow Notre Dame off the ball. It just was not. That was not on anybody's radar, but they did. And so, you think to the simplification of the assignments. Eric, you could probably speak to that way more than I can, but for so long during the season, gosh, those guard tackle pulls just look bad. The timing of them, the speed of them or lack thereof, and they just could not get in sync. A lot of stuff has to work together when you're running those gap schemes that are really a trademark of what Garrett Riley and Lincoln Riley have been known for over the last several years. But the Notre Dame game, it was just, let's just be simple, right? Let's just do more zone, some duo stuff, and just block the guy in front of you. And that's what happened. I think that really spearheaded some things. They certainly were not perfect over that winning streak that closed the season, but I think the most consistent thing, of course, on offense was they were able to run the ball pretty well, including at South Carolina. Even though you don't reach the end zone, walk out of that game going, they didn't score an offensive touchdown. What in the world? Even when you don't do that, even when you have a lot of heartburn about the offense in that game, when you run for 220 yards or whatever it was, you're still able to control the game. And that's a great lesson. I think moving forward, if you can play good defense and run the ball, like I think Michigan, the national champion, is a pretty good example of that you don't, and I'm not saying Michigan's offense was on the same level as Clemson's, but I think the last 3 years, not just with Michigan, but also with Georgia, with their back titles, have shown us that you don't have to have 2019 LSU's ridiculous offense to win a title. You don't have to have the 2018 Clemson offense. You don't have to have the 2020 Alabama offense. If you can play some elite high-level defense and you can actually control games on the offensive side by running the ball, you can get by with just really good quarterback play instead of transcendent quarterback play. So I think that's what they're hoping to build on. Of course, you have Matt Luke, the high-priced offensive line coach coming in. Everything I've picked up, and of course, we always fall into the trap, regardless of who it is. The new guy, oh, he's got all the best ideas, and everything's great, and the guy was terrible. I'm not saying that. I don't want to hyperbolize that, but I do get a strong sense of Matt Luke. His message is basically like, hey, dudes, and I think he said this at halftime in the Gator Bowl, like, it ain't scheme, it's nothing else, but you got to go earn it. You got to go buck up and get nasty. And so I think that'll be the message this offseason from him. And so I'm interested to see where it goes from here for sure.
Yeah, I mean, just so much there, Larry, that was good to take from. And let's talk about this offense itself. And you were kind of alluding to it towards the end of your comment. You start with the Duke game, which was an abomination, right? You end with the Kentucky game, which was very exciting and can really be a springboard into next year. This was an offense that only averaged 29 points per game now and about 400 yards of offense. Now, what you were just saying, can that be okay in this current stage where you can win titles with that and a good defense? What can we expect from this offense? Year 2, Lincoln Riley. We saw some different wrinkles. We saw some creativity this year, maybe not as much as I honestly was expecting. But another year of Cade, wide receivers getting healthy, hopefully, Maffa back, Matt Luke. What do you expect to see from this offense in 2024?
First off, I want to go over some numbers from last season. Not to get too stat heavy, but it's
we
pretty
love
amazing.
Stats. I love stats.
Clemson's offense last season, yards per play, 5.25. That ranked 98th nationally. First downs per game, 23.4. That ranked 16th nationally.
Huh.
What? So
how does that happen?
And try this on. The 2018 offense that I just talked about as being pretty good, generationally good. First downs per game, 23.9.
Wow.
Washington's offense this year, pretty good, 23.7. So right there in that range. The obvious takeaway for me when you think about it is, what did that 2018 Clemson offense and this past year's Washington offense have in spades that this year's Clemson offense was lacking in spades? Explosive plays. Like, that's it. And I know Dabo rightly harps on the turnovers and as that's it. If we don't turn it over, we win. If we do, we might lose. That's obviously a huge part of it, obviously. But I would suggest humbly that explosive plays have to be right there below turnovers, because if you don't have explosive plays, you're asking your offense to navigate down the field, execute down the field, a lot of plays, and there's more margin for error for any offense, even the best offenses. That's hard to do without making a mistake, without committing a crucial penalty in the red zone, and of course, without holding on to the ball. And so I think that is where Garrett Riley and this offense just have to figure something out. They have to get more explosive to just make it easier on themselves. Clemson's plays of 20 yards or more, and this is both pass and run, 3.53 a game. That's 98th nationally. 2018 Clemson was 6.93. So double, right? That
Mm-hmm.
says an awful lot. Washington this year was 6.35 plays of 20 or more yards a game. And so, again, I go back to the running game. And I think the Florida State game showed this some. The Notre Dame game showed this a lot. If you can run the ball dependably and maybe even forcefully, which they did run it forcefully against Notre Dame, that makes things so much easier for your trigger man, because it brings second and third level players into conflict, and it creates one-on-one matchups. And so, you know, Phil Maffa is not going to be the playmaker that Travis Etienne was, but I think if you're able to establish a consistent and powerful running game, I think that's a big part of the answer. Of course, we haven't even really gotten into Cade Klubnik and the physical and mental development that he's going to have to show this offseason. How many starts does he have? I guess 14. Is that right?
Yeah.
Once Tennessee last year, and then 13 this year. Okay, it's time for that dude to be more dependable, right? Like, I think that's fair to say. But when you're in Garrett Riley's shoes, I think it really all starts with the establishing the running game, getting that more consistent, and then of course that sort of points toward Matt Luke and the job that he's undertaking this offseason.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. I think just to see, what are the changes? Is it a mind shift? Is it physically something that we see? Is it taking more shots? Is it throwing the ball downfield? Is it having an understanding of the offense and knowing where to go with the football? So 8 sacks against Kentucky does not happen. Because there's just too many times, when you watch this film, it's a statue. It's building snowballs. It's not good. I mean, you can't do that. And so really, I guess from things that you've gathered, Larry, things that you've seen, what needs to be the biggest step, in Cade Klubnik's development? Because physically, I guess I'm leading the answer here. Physically, the tools are there, like the arm talent, the legs, the way, the angles that he can throw. All of that is there to me. But outside of that, I guess, what have you heard or what have you gathered that needs to, or has to, not even a need, it has to improve for Clemson to be back successful to their standard?
Between the ears. And that's not something that I can prognosticate. I am certainly not in the camp of, well, what we've seen is there's no way this kid's going to give us what we need. We've seen enough. I'm not in that camp.
Right. And more, let me ask you this, though, specifically. Is it more like his offense, more the defense, all of it? Like, because there's a lot to that, I think. And again, not knowing the conversations that you have or haven't had, is there something specific that people have said, man, just coverages, got to know coverage, got to understand that, got to, know where to go to the football when he sees cover 2 on this side? Is there more to it than that?
It's so much, Eric. I mean, it's hard for me to narrow it down to one thing, but the first thing I think of is the sort of going rogue moments. The Florida State game wasn't that because he just didn't make the obvious read, right, on the RPO in overtime. He thought there was something on the outside, and when they needed 6 inches, he pulled it when he should have given it. You know, I mean, I think all of us still remember Dabo yelling, 1 yard. We needed 1 yard. Why did you throw it? But the Miami game, where they tell him expressly in a timeout seconds before, okay, give the ball to Will. This is a direct handoff. Well, he sees something that he likes and he pulls it and then ends up running backwards, horizontal and backwards. North Carolina game, end of the first half. They have a top. Mac Brown gave them a break by calling a timeout for his defense. So they had time to say, with 8 seconds left, the ball at the 4-yard line, is that right? Okay, we don't have any timeouts. You have to throw this ball. Well, doesn't throw it, and credit to him, man. Like, and I think this is a positive. He made an amazing play to nudge that ball over the goal line. But the alarming and concerning thing to me is that he did the same thing in his first college start in the Orange Bowl at the end of the first half against Tennessee. Didn't have good situation. Well, he had bad situational awareness. Let's not sugarcoat. That's just accurate. And what it suggested was, wait, like, part of him has developed since that night in South Florida, but in a very fundamental way, part of him hasn't. And so that's the most concerning thing in my mind, at least. The other thing is, we saw this in the Gator Bowl. He sees things. He doesn't see things in time, at least from my view. Like, a receiver will break open and he waits a tick or two, and then it's too late, right? And so his ability to see things develop, I think, is certainly a box that I would say needs to be checked. We also should talk about that physical part. You say he looks the part physically. I would just say body composition wise, he needs to add some girth because he was tossed around a bit. And what's wild to me is that Max Duggan, who of course was Garrett Riley's quarterback the previous season, and who was an absolute battering ram, almost like a Tebow type, in the way he was just lowering his shoulder and picking up big yards. He was 205. Wow. 207, which is right where Cade is listed. Same height, basically, I believe. And now maybe Cade lost some weight through the season. Maybe he was under 200. I have no idea. But it's just fascinating to me how two guys who have pretty much the same physical profile are two totally different presences, running the ball. Anyway, but back to my point. He needs to get bigger, needs to get thicker, needs to get stronger. And I think even Dabo has said that. But if we're narrowing it down to one thing, Eric, back to your question, I just don't know if you really can, because there's just like there's a checklist of things that I would be concerned about him improving on.
Sure. And I think something for perspective too is, if you had told us all before the season that Cade would basically not have Cole Turner and Antonio Williams for the whole year, we all would have thought disaster. Yep. Absolute disaster. So thinking that they're going to be back, obviously fully healthy, and then you've had the emergence of Tyler Brown, which has been huge, Adam Randall, players like that at wide receiver. The wide receiver position looks to be improved for next year. I'll just want to ask you kind of a broader question here, Larry, in terms of the portal, because I know so many Clemson people watching and listening have questions. Is Dabo using the portal? Will he ever use the portal? What is that? Now, so the transfer portal is this place where players can go in and leave and go to another school. But I think one thing we have to remind everybody is that it's very hard to pick up quality backups out of the portal. That is almost nearly impossible because they want to come and play. So from what you know, Larry, did Clemson get to maybe, second base with any of these people in the portal? And do you see Dabo using the portal, or at least trying to in the future?
I think that if and I've been thinking about this the last few weeks. Quarterback, for instance, you have a lot of uncertainty, right? Um, with Cade, also with Christopher Vizina behind them, of course. Trent Pierman, Tyson's coming back to be a Zeb Nolan, I guess, like break glass in case of emergency. Like if, and I'm trying to be fair here. I think this is pretty fair-minded. If Clemson truly were, aggressive in the portal, I don't know if aggressive is the right word, but all in, so to speak. I just look at Riley Leonard, and I'm like,
interesting.
Early, like, I mean, and I'm not saying give him the starting job. I'm saying like, hey, Riley, come, like we have an inconsistent quarterback, but hey, y'all battle. If you think you can beat him out, like if you play the way you did this past season, you might be able to beat him out. Whatever the messaging is. And to Cade, hey man, I love you. I support you. But we don't owe a starting spot. We owe this team and this university, being the best we can be, our best opportunities to succeed. You look at, to your question, yes, they were in it with a number of offensive linemen. As to, which guys wanted to play right away and wanted assurances on that, as to which guys were getting better offers from elsewhere. I mean, I think we pretty much know that Clemson's stance on NIL is they're not going to lead with it in recruiting, and that means high school and portal recruiting. They don't want it to be the reason a guy comes here, but they don't want to, in Dabo's words, but they don't want it to be a reason a guy leaves. So, for instance, hypothetically, Phil Maffa, who has a body of work, if he comes to the coach and says, "Hey, this school A is is coming after me," then hey, let's get you a better deal, Phil. You've got money, figurative money in the bank on the field, and so let's do that. And so people can argue all they want about whether this is a weakness or not. You look at Michigan, as talented as they were, as well as as underrated as their high school recruiting was, highly underrated, because that team, you could argue, had the most NFL talent of anybody. Man, they have recruited offensive line, or used the portal on the offensive line extremely well in identifying guys who come in right away, and so I think it's fair to look at Clemson and say, should they be a little more aggressive? Is Cade Denhoff really nothing against Denhoff, is that really what you want, a defensive end, or could you find somebody better? I don't know. Do you really have 7 starters on the offensive line? Because that's what Dabo said after signing day. He's like, man, we're Trent Howard, man, he's a starter, and he is. He did start however many games, right? But is it fair to say, I don't know if you have truly 7 starters on the offensive line right now? I don't think that's unreasonable to say. So I don't know if I'm really directly answering that question, because it's such a murky, hard to answer question that has to draw from a lot of different sort of perspectives.
Basically, they were in there, Larry. They were trying, but maybe not as. And it is tough, because we just saw FSU get popped for basically offering a kid an NIL deal before he even signed. And
yes, and we have to, if we're gonna. I'm glad you mentioned FSU, because that game in late September, I wrote about this earlier this week. If that was fairly viewed as a referendum on full-on portal versus portal indifference, and more of the slow cook route of talent development and procurement, and it was fairly viewed as a referendum, because Florida State's biggest playmakers in that game, the most game-changing plays, were made by portal guys. So if we fairly call that a referendum, can we sit here right now in mid-January in the wake of what you just said happened at Florida State last week, in the wake of what has happened at Michigan? That doesn't have anything to do with the portal, but just probably going to get popped by the NCAA in the midst of the craziness at Georgia with, reportedly asking staffers to drink at functions with recruits, all that stuff. Is it okay to say that, hey, man, the Dabo way, that the jury is somewhat still out? Like, that there's absolutely merit to that sort of crockpot way of developing and preserving your culture? I mean, I dare say that Barrett Carter, one of the biggest reasons he came back was because of the culture that really is so magnetic. And I do believe they have something going that not a lot of other programs do. And I think that should be noted in any conversation about the portal. I don't think that it's just a slam dunk case that, oh, they're failures and they're not interested in the portal and Dabo's hopelessly behind. I think it's okay to question. It's okay to criticize, but I don't know that there's an easy, single answer
it's
to it.
fascinating. One thing I do want to remove from the Clemson conversation, from the Clemson vocabulary, is the crock pot. I think Coach Sweeney referenced that earlier too. Let's have a good smoker, okay? Like, there's much more manly things that take time to cook. All right, so let's just do that real quickly, Larry. This has been awesome. Really appreciate your insight and time. I do kind of want to put you on the spot and maybe a little bit of rapid fire. Top 3 things that will determine the outcome of Clemson's 24 are who or what?
Offensive line,
I like
quarterback,
that.
receiver.
All offense,
1, 2, 3.
all things that seem very controllable. That I agree with you. I agree with you on all 3 things. So I think defense takes care of itself. I think that is fine and going to be a leading unit in the ACC, but also in the country. This was awesome, man. I know our listeners, our viewers are going to be jumping all in these comments. They're going to have some fun things to say. And Larry, you're the best, brother. Thank you so much for your time.
No, y'all are the best. Thank y'all so much for having me.
All right, guys, big shout out to Larry Williams again for his time. Couldn't do it without him. And of course, our friends over at Ingles, we always appreciate their support, but we need your support too. We need you to jump over to YouTube, jump on this channel with us, guys. We have so much fun. You need to see our reactions, see everything that's going on, and we appreciate your support there. So review, comment, subscribe. We love seeing all the comments in there, all the fun things that you guys do. And of course, the OGs over on Apple Podcasts as well. Rate, review, subscribe. We would greatly appreciate that. But until next time, we'll see y'all.